Hi friends, thanks for coming back to read with me today. We are up to chapter 8 in Charlotte's Web. This is a really short chapter. It's a tiny one, but it takes us to a different setting in the story. It actually takes us back to the original setting of the story. If you remember, chapter 1 started at the Arable's home. That's where Wilbur was born. That's where Fern lives. And then it moved on to the Zuckerman's farm. Now, given that Wilbur was born at the Arable's home, you have to imagine their home is a little bit different than our homes. Okay, I don't have any pigs in my backyard. I don't know if you do, but I don't. But Wilbur was born there, so there's pigs there. So I'm sure in your mind you realize that the Arables have a barn and a small farm too. Okay, I have to guess that the Zuckermans is a much larger farm than the Arables, and that's why they sold Wilbur there. That's why they couldn't keep all the pigs, because they must just have a small farm. So now we're on to chapter 8, and this is called A Talk at Home. Okay, so if you remember, we talked about last time how the titles of chapters is almost like a little foreshadowing, a little hint of what's going to come. So this talk at home happens at the Arable's house. On Sunday morning, Mr. and Mrs. Arable and Fern were sitting at breakfast in the kitchen. Avery had finished and was upstairs looking for his slingshot. "Did you know that Uncle Homer's goslings hatched?" asked Fern. "How many?" asked Mr. Arable. "7," replied Fern. "There were 8 eggs, but 1 egg didn't hatch, and the goose told Templeton she didn't want any more, so he took it away." "The goose did what?" said Mrs. Arable, gazing at her daughter with a queer, worried expression. "Told Templeton she didn't want the egg any more," repeated Fern. "Who's Templeton?" asked Mrs. Arable. "He's the rat," replied Fern. "None of us like him very much." "Who's us?" said Mr. Arable. "Oh, everybody in the barn cellar. Wilbur and the sheep and the lambs and the goose and the gander and the goslings and Charlotte and me." "Charlotte?" said Mrs. Arable. "Who's Charlotte?" "She's Wilbur's best friend. She's terribly clever." "And what does she look like?" asked Mrs. Arable. "Well," said Charlotte thoughtfully, "she has 8 legs. All spiders do, I guess." "Charlotte is a spider?" asked Fern's mother. Fern nodded. "A big gray one. She has a web across the top of Wilbur's doorway. She catches flies and sucks their blood, and Wilbur adores her." "Does he really?" said Mrs. Arable rather vaguely. She was staring at Fern with a worried expression on her face. "Oh, yes, Wilbur adores Charlotte," said Fern. "Do you know what Charlotte said when the goslings hatched?" "I haven't the faintest idea," said Mr. Arable. "Tell us." "Well, when the first gosling stuck its little head out from under the goose, I was sitting on my stool in the corner, and Charlotte was on her web, and she made a speech. She said, 'I'm sure that every one of us here in the barn cellar will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks of unremitting effort and patience on part of the goose, she now has something to show for it.' Don't you think that was a pleasant thing for her to say?" "Yes, I do," said Miss Arable. "And now, Fern, it's time to get ready for Sunday school. And tell Avery to get ready. And this afternoon you can tell me more about what goes on in Uncle Homer's barn. Aren't you spending quite a lot of time there? You go there almost every afternoon, don't you?" "I like it there," replied Fern. She wiped her mouth and ran upstairs. After she left the room, Mrs. Arable spoke in a low voice to her husband. "I'm worried about Fern," she said. "Did you hear her, the way she rambled on about the animals, pretending that they talk?" Mr. Arable chuckled. "Maybe they do talk," he said. "I've sometimes wondered. At any rate, don't worry about Fern. She's just got a lively imagination. Kids think they hear all sorts of things." "Just the same, I do worry about her," replied Miss Arable. "I think I shall ask Dr. Dorian about her the next time I see him. He loves Fern almost as much as we do. I want him to know how queerly she's acting about that pig and everything. I don't think it's normal. You know perfectly well animals don't talk." Mr. Arable grinned. "Maybe our ears aren't as sharp as Fern's," he said. So in this chapter, we get to know Mrs. Arable and Mr. Arable a little bit better, don't we? We had a good impression of Mr. Arable from the first chapter, even though he originally was out to kill Wilbur because he was a runt. He listened to his daughter. He stopped and he listened to her, and he thought about her reasons, and he decided to let her keep Wilbur. So I feel like he has a very kind of easy way about him. Mrs. Arable, though, is getting worried. She thinks it's strange. Fern's stories are strange, talking to animals and all that kind of stuff. And I'm guessing if you went home and told your parents that, I don't know, you were having a conversation with a dog one day and maybe with a few birds, they would probably be a little bit worried about you too. Mr. Arable saying to him, well, maybe it's possible. Maybe we just don't listen as well as Fern does. So, it's interesting to see how differently both of her parents react. Mom's worried and Dad just thinks it's all good fun. Anyway, I gave us a little sneak peek into life at home with the Arables. I'll see you tomorrow for the next chapter. This one was short, but our next chapter is a wee bit longer. So, get ready. Goodbye, friends.